and in which society is, again, sort of hierarchically arranged with differential relations to God, and yet each one of those mediated relations confers meaning. In other words, meaning not in some small sense like, well, my life has meaning, I've got a good job and a lot of friends. No, meaning in the sense that you were an actor in a cosmic drama in which your decision to sin or not to sin, to be saved or not to be saved, was crucially important in a big cosmic drama, which while your everyday life might be really bad, corvée labor was no fun, while that might not have been so hot, there was a way that your life had some structure of meaning. Also, in this period of Western Civ, and I think this is clearly right, because all things were seen to be created, right, then even the very rocks and stones, St. Francis and all this, the birds, the rocks, the trees, the stones, all were signs of God. Now, that view of Christianity continues on at least till Melville. Why do you think he's so mad at Moby Dick? The good old normal New Englander goes, well, I don't understand. Starbuck goes to Captain Ahab, why are you so mad at a poor dumb fish that did but strike thee out of blind instinct? And Ahab just says, you're crazy. All things are guided by this. Of course, he doesn't say the word God. That would have been a little over the edge. By some inscrutable power that has hounded and dogged us since first we walked upon this earth. It is the thing behind the fish I chiefly hate, which, of course, explains why Melville thought he had written a very nasty book. He had, for that period. In any case, the world of Melville that he evokes there and the previous in the medieval period, which I don't think was in some practical ways at all over by then, and in some ways still isn't over, was an enchanted world. By enchanted, I don't want you to get the happy idea that that's a Walt Disney notion of it. But it does contrast with what Max Weber will talk about when I discuss these modern philosophers, and that's a disenchanted world. And my easiest and quickest way to give you Max Weber on this is to suggest two things. One, a disenchanted world is one in which there's a place for everything and everything's in its place, where quantitative relations of numerical ones, are more important than qualitative ones, by and large, where rules and procedures are followed, period. That's procedural rationality for Weber. Characterizes bureaucracies and economies. Rules are followed, period. It's a principle of them. But without giving you a lot of Max Weber, I can simply refer you to a better critic of bureaucracy, Franz Kafka. So if you want to read Before the Law or The Trial, you get a better sense for how just exactly how disenchanted modern institutions can appear. I mean, it is true that the justice of the medieval period was arbitrary, but while it was arbitrary, there was something human about it. In other words, it could take account of differences. Under procedural justice, if you've ever been in traffic court, you know how that works, right? Driving drunk, 1 year in jail, $100 fine, probation. 1 year in jail, $100 fine, probation. Nobody cares why you were drunk. They don't care if Uncle Henry died. Nothing, doesn't matter, because they have a procedure and they follow it. That's a disenchanted world, one in which the rules are there. Now, in not all respects do I mean to say that's worse than an enchanted one. Not at all. I just mean that from our perspective now, we don't want to call that modern life that's so hot, and this other stuff the Dark Ages. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. Okay. So if one wanted a sort of moniker for the whole medieval period, in one way or another, the imitation of a life like Christ guides that period, to the extent that it's possible for whoever can do it, and to the extent that various groups start demanding a role in that life, because struggle plays a role in each one of these social formations that I'll have to wait until I discuss Marx to get around to, but I'm willing to wait. Okay, I guess that now, since this is a philosophy course, I'll give you a philosophical argument, since I've just been doing talk about human values and laying out 3 positions. And if I hope I have out there at least one hedonist, one Stoic, you know. I mean, you can still be these things. I mean, as far as I know, you can go down to the mall and get little books on them, and it even tells you what to wear and some of the things to say. Let me give you Anselm's magnificent argument in the medieval period for the existence of God. I don't have it written down here. I'll have to reconstruct it from memory. Now, you won't understand Anselm's argument, let me warn you in advance, that many philosophers consider it a trick. But to understand Anselm's argument, you have to see that it's an argument between only 2 interlocutors. The fool who hath said in his heart that there is no God, and the believer. If you are neither, this argument won't have any impact on you. In other words, if you're a person who is not either someone who said there is no God or there is, then you're really not a party to this dispute. So in a certain sense, I'm not, and it gives me kind of the freedom to throw the argument out quickly to you and let you consider it. But I do think it's important to point out that as weird as it sounds today to believe in God and to do it seriously, it sounds weird to me too. I'm not up here preaching, and I'm not even suggesting this. It sounds absolutely weird. In the history of philosophical discourse, this argument I'm about to give is the one that's most nearly proved. It's a very powerful argument. So it holds between interlocutors, one of which doesn't believe and the other does. And the argument goes something like this. It starts with a magnificent definition that is not an attempt to tell us all about what God is, but about how we understand God. And that definition is as follows. God is a being a greater than which cannot be conceived, period. God is a being a greater than which cannot be conceived, period. Now, once you've bought that, you may see where the argument's headed. Such a God, the second premise is this one. It is greater to exist in the mind and in reality than in the mind alone. Now let me say a bit about those 2 premises, then I'll quickly give you the conclusion. The first one seems to be a simple definition about how we use the word God. Namely, when we in the West say God, we mean a being, a bigger one than which you ain't got. So it's silly to us to go, well, my God's going to whip yours because ours is just the biggest there is, so he's a being greater than which we can't conceive. The second premise, however, looks like a trick, but it isn't. It's directed at the non-believer, because clearly the dispute between the 2 is this. The non-believer also must accept the premise that it's greater to exist in the mind and in reality than in the mind alone, because what the non-believer is trying to argue is that God doesn't exist in reality. So if he didn't believe that, or she didn't believe it, they wouldn't be a non-believer. They wouldn't care about the dispute. So here Anselm's given 2 premises that seem to be absolutely acceptable to both interlocutors. But from just those 2 premises, it follows that God must exist. Must exist in reality. Because if he did not, we could conceive a greater. Now, if you think that's a trick, I'll just do it again. This is where you do philosophy. It's like you pull the rabbit out of the hat. Do it again. Since it's greater, to exist in the mind and in reality than in the mind alone, and we're conceiving God, if we conceive a non-existent God, that ain't him. Because we could conceive a greater. One just like that one, plus one that really exists. Follow me? So, when you use the word, you're committed to the belief in God's real existence. Anselm's argument is elegant. In a dispute between believer and non-believer, only on pain of absolute contradiction can you get out of Anselm's argument. It's a bind. Because God being a being greater than which cannot be conceived, if you buy the premise that it's greater to exist in reality and in the mind than in the mind alone, it follows that God exists in reality and in the mind. So that's Anselm's ontological argument. I won't pursue what has been pursued for, 1,000 years and more since, and that's the whole series of objections to this argument. I would simply say that in terms of an elegant conceptual argument, it is perhaps one of the greatest in philosophy, and goes to show, as Nietzsche once said, that aren't the strangest of things the most nearly proved. It looks like a trick, doesn't it? The argument kind of looks like a trick. I see heads out there going, this is kind of tricky. Maybe it is, but if it is, it's a good trick.